Yeah, I'm ready. All right, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for another Colorado Sun political event. We're really excited to head into the legislative session here in Colorado next week with some special guests to talk about, all the big items that we're going to be discussing at the Capitol. The things that are going to kind of have my head spinning for the next 5 or 6 months here. So we got a great lineup of folks to join us tonight. First up will be Governor Polis, but let me just again welcome you to this event and just talk about how excited we are at the Colorado Sun that we're able to do things like this. I don't know if you were all able to read our editor's note last week, but the Colorado Sun is going really strong. We've got a staff now of, I think, 25 or 26 people, which is really exciting, considering we started a few years ago with just 10 people. I know it's definitely made my life, day-to-day life, a lot easier, and it's exciting to see so much coverage. The Boulder wildfire and the whole team working together to cover that was kind of a really good example of what we're able to do with all these new resources that we have. So thank you to everybody who has signed up, who's become a member. If you're not a member yet, it's really easy to do. It takes about 5 minutes, makes a huge impact at coloradosun.com/join. And hope you can join us and sign up as a Newsletters Plus member and get the unaffiliated newsletter, which comes out on Tuesdays and Fridays. We work really hard on that to bring you behind the scenes political coverage and news from across the state, and make sure that our notebooks are empty. You're getting everything we are and giving you the most insight that we can get. We work really hard to give you guys really good stuff on that. I want to thank our sponsor for tonight, Aponte and Busam, public affairs group here in Denver. And I also want to thank the folks at the Denver Community Media who are making this high-tech version, not from my living room anymore, of this presentation possible. So our first guest tonight is Governor Polis, who's heading into the final year of his first term, is going to be up for re-election in November, and probably doesn't need much of an introduction. So, Governor, I'll hand it off to you. I'm hoping you can kind of give us a sense of, what you're going to be focusing on legislatively this year at the Capitol, and anything else that's at top of mind. Obviously, I know you and I have been seeing a lot of each other at the Boulder wildfire, so I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Jesse, and I want to thank the Colorado Sun for hosting this event. And it was exciting to hear that update on the Colorado Sun's success, because clear and accurate journalism, information is the foundation of a strong democracy, something that here on January 6th, on the anniversary of the failed insurrection, we can particularly bring great appreciation to the work done by independent journalists holding elected officials accountable, Democrat, Republican, and unaffiliated, to make sure we have the highest and best information for the American public. And Colorado Sun is really at the heart of that work. And of course, we're excited by new models and the disruptive approach that you've taken. Before I begin my remarks on the legislative session, I really thought it was important to take a moment to acknowledge the deep pain and suffering caused by the fire in Boulder County. Thousands of Coloradans. Just today, the destroyed home count peaked above 1,000, just over 1,000 homes destroyed, each one full of priceless memories for families that live there. Many more fled from their homes, have damage. Many didn't know whether they'd have a home to return to. I've had the opportunity to, of course, see the destruction firsthand. Burnt out cars, ashes and foundations where entire subdevelopments used to be. And I've got the opportunity to meet with survivors who lost everything, but still have their spirit and their health, filled with hope and gratitude for all of the assistance that's come their way. We look forward to the president's visit tomorrow. The recovery from these fires will be long. It will be difficult for those impacted, but they won't have to make that journey alone. The state of Colorado, so many friends, family members, and neighbors stand by ready to help. And it's really events like the Boulder County fires that show us how fortunate we are to live in a place where we come together to help one another in our times of need. Getting to the legislative session coming up. This last year has been challenging. Pandemics changed so many aspects of our lives, and we're really focused on doing everything that we can as a state to save Coloradans money, increasing affordability, decreasing costs, protecting communities. It's going to take all of us, the legislature, my administration, key partners and stakeholders, to get it done. And Colorado is a great place to live. And, if you want a job, there's work for you. In fact, there's, if anything, a labor shortage. But what's frustrating people is how costs have gone up faster than incomes. Saving people money is nothing new to me or my administration. You might recall when I first took office, I created the Office of Saving People Money on Healthcare. Healthcare being one of those more expensive line items for most families. You look at most families, rent or mortgage, healthcare is usually number two, right after that. But we can't stop there. Of course, there's continued work to be done. We're proud of the work done on saving people money, whether it's the reinsurance program, which brought down rates for individuals by more than 20%. And I see Senator Rankin on the line and others who help with that. We also, I'm very excited about the implementation of the prescription pricing reforms, prescription drug pricing reforms, and of course, the Colorado option. There's more work to do. We know that. We also save families money with passing full day kindergarten. Families were paying $400, $500 a month out of pocket for their 5-year-olds. That is now free across the great state of Colorado, and of course, preschool is on the way. We signed a transformative tax reform cap package that cut taxes for families and closed special interest loopholes that only benefited the few. Seniors in Colorado now know that their Social Security income will not be taxed by the state. We eliminated the business personal property tax for tens of thousands of Colorado small businesses to help make Colorado more affordable for them. But yes, there's more work ahead. That includes prepaying some of the paid family and medical leave premiums to delay payroll increases that voters overwhelmingly approved. It also means shoring up the unemployment trust fund to prevent a payroll tax increase on that. It means doubling down on saving people money every way that the state can. Can we, for instance, extend an additional $5.55 per vehicle savings in vehicle registration, save people $11 per car, making it free to start a business in Colorado, saving people the $50 fee for pulling out articles of incorporation. We should remove barriers to entrepreneurship and new companies. And of course, we all have deep respect for our professionals in the healthcare fields, nurses, mental health professionals. We would love to save them some money by waiving fees for this next year. It's about $162 average fee for mental health professionals and about an $85 average savings for nurse licenses if we work with the legislature to avoid those fees this year. It's little things too. Dairies, for instance, the dairy inspection fee was scheduled to go up. We'd like to avoid that. To prevent an inspection program fee that otherwise would have occurred in the ag industry. Nursing home licenses. This particularly affects some of our smaller and mid-sized nursing homes. Their nursing home fees are traditionally $2,700 a year. Let's reduce that and help them pass those savings along to their workers and to benefits of their residents. We'd love to delay the road usage fee in the historic transportation package in 2021. Really, every way that we can save people money, we look forward to working with Democrats and Republicans to do that. Coloradans are going to get an average Tabor refund of $492 in the following fiscal year. That will help a lot of families. The income tax reduction down to 4.5% is worth $20 or more for the average family, but even more important for all the businesses that can put that money right back into growth, raises, and hiring more people. That's just a glimpse of what we hope to accomplish with our legislative partners in the weeks and months ahead. And I'm particularly excited that we can deliver these real savings for people while also making a record investment in public education with an 8% increase in funding for our public schools. A plan to sustain that over time. And just to show what that means in your kid's classroom, that's about $13,000 increase for a class of 25 people. Now, we have local control, and I fully support that. Districts will decide the best way at the local level to invest that along with parents and principals, but that can mean a combination of better teacher compensation, smaller class size, maybe restoring programs in the arts that might have been cut by some school districts. To see what $13,000 additional funding for a class of 25 kids can do, I fully trust the creativity of our teachers, our principals, and our school districts on the ground to make sure that the state gets the biggest bang for the buck in this historic investment that we're making in our public schools, along with maintaining record reserves for fiscal integrity of the state. I'm also very excited about two other areas that cost Coloradans money where we hope to save the money, and that's housing and childcare. We know that too many Coloradans struggle to make to afford rent or mortgage. And I want to thank the Affordable Housing Task Force under the leadership of Chair Dylan Roberts, Vice Chair Julie Gonzalez, putting forth recommendations for a one-time transformational effort with American Rescue Plan Act funding to truly provide additional housing that people can afford, rural, urban, suburban, across our entire state, whether it's local infrastructure grants to incentivize affordable housing, whether it's supporting high quality innovations like modular homes, 3D printed homes, bolstering our supply of workforce housing. Colorado needs to do all of the above so that we can lead on making sure that not only are we a great place to live, but that people can afford to live here. Another part of affording to live here is childcare. There's no question, of course, that preschool, kindergarten, quality childcare benefits the child and the family, but it also has an immediate benefit to the workforce today and to saving families money. So in addition to creating the new Department of Early Childhood, implementing universal preschool passed by more than 2/3 of the voters by 2023, which will save Colorado families thousands of dollars a year, we're also focused on our childcare workforce, the backbone of the industry, providers in every community. We announced our transition agency director, Michael Cook, just the other day, who served in previous governor's administration as well. Last year, we helped providers expand capacity, more opportunities for families to use services. We're looking to build on this with more support for workers in early childhood education and really lead by example by working with the legislature to support renovating existing state facilities, including higher education facilities, community colleges and colleges, to provide on-site childcare for employees, and in the case of community colleges and colleges, also for students, so that a young single mom doesn't have to choose between her education and her child. Our third priority this legislative session is to make Colorado safer. Look, we're in the middle of the pack with regard to crime rates. I was looking it up just before this. U.S. News and World Report, I think, has us at number 28 for both and for there's property crime and nonviolent crime. But depending on what source you look at, we're usually between 20th and 30th in crime. You know how much I love Colorado. That's not good enough. My big, bold goal is over the next 5 years, I would like our state to be one of the 10 safest states, with in the top 10 for lowest crime rate of any state. It'll take a lot of work to get there, but let's start this legislative session with a historic opportunity to invest in a package to tackle crime and promote public safety, including funding for more and better policing, community-based grants, a safer streets program. It turns out a bulk of crimes are often committed in a small number of, even within zip codes, areas. Better lighting and monitoring of those areas can make a big difference. A youth offender intervention to prevent young people who made a mistake from becoming hardened criminals for their entire lives. We also want to beef up the ability of the Colorado Bureau of Investigations and the State Forensics Lab to get convictions for people who commit serious crimes. Make sure that we can also have a restorative justice pilot and co-responder models proven to reduce crime in communities across our state. The best way, of course, to reduce crime is to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And that's why it's also an important conversation to include the behavioral health aspects, including the transformative investments in behavioral health that we also look forward to working with the Democrats and Republicans in the legislature to get done. So look, these priorities are bold and ambitious, saving people money, transformative investments in housing and behavioral health and childcare, and making Colorado one of the safest states in the nation. It's going to take all of us, Democrats, Republicans, independents, rural, urban, suburban, working together to get this done. But here in Colorado, we always have found and we always will find a way to rise above and deliver real results for the people of our state. I want to thank all of you for tuning into the Colorado Sun tonight, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Governor. Just a reminder to everyone who's watching tonight, you can always submit questions by emailing your question to questions@coloradosun.com. I'm getting them flowing in here. Well, I heard one promise that I know we'll be tracking for the next, we like to track your promises here at the Colorado Sun. So the top 10 safest states one, we'll be watching it if you get reelected, the progress on that. So let's dive into one of the things that you talked about in terms of saving people money. You obviously submitted this request recently to the legislature to delay the implementation of the transportation fees. And one of the interesting things about that is that the fees would, come still, but they would happen actually after the 2022 election. And obviously, Republicans have been attacking Democrats across the country for the rising cost of gas, of food, things like that. Is this message is this thing that you want to work on this legislative session in direct response to the attacks that Republicans have been leveling on Democrats across the country?
I don't think it's so much Republicans attacking Democrats or Democrats attacking Republicans. I think it's just regular people all over our country and in Colorado saying, hey, government, do something about our costs. And I think you hear Republicans and Democrats hopefully being responsive to that. And I think a logical way to be responsive to that is to avoid a 2-cent increase in the gas tax. And that is something that in normal times, if gas is $1.50 a gallon or $1.80 a gallon, inflation is low. People understand that costs go up slowly with time and their incomes go up too. That's different than where we are in this moment. And it's up to Democrats and Republicans in office to rise to this moment and say, you know what, we get it. Your costs have gone up more than your income. We want to do something about it where we can. And one example of that is that 2-cent gas tax, which we can delay.
So obviously, though, a lot of this is one-time funding, right? So next legislative session, for instance, when we get to 2023, I mean, if inflation still exists and prices are still high, can you commit all of this money again to reduce fees, to put off the gas tax? Is this something that's sustainable, or is it going to be just a short-term fix?
You're focused on that one. That's a relatively small ticket item. Luckily, a lot of the bigger things only need to be done once. I'll point to one, and that's shoring up the unemployment trust fund, which we propose about $600 million to do. If we fail to act, payroll taxes will go up in Colorado, costing businesses and workers money. By working with Democrats and Republicans, we hope to avoid that. I'm not saying it'll never happen again, but this pandemic was very unusual. There were just a huge amount. It's not anybody's fault. It's essentially there were enormous draws on unemployment that nobody had modeled, and we have an enormous deficit there that we can shore up. We also passed and I signed bills to save people money in the long run. I'll give you an example. And Senator Fenberg's on the line. The Keep Colorado Wild Pass program. An annual fee for Colorado state parks was and is $84 a year. Thanks to the legislation I signed, by 2023, we expect that'll be under $40, probably in the $30 to $35 range, saving families an average of $50 for access to our world-class parks, even as we expand new and better state parks and significantly improve camping and parking in and trails in many of our existing ones.
So I know you mentioned criminal justice, and recently, last week, and obviously the nation's been talking about the Rahel Aguilera-Madero's case in Jefferson County. And I know you talked a little bit to 9 News yesterday about your decision there, and how it was aimed at kind of parity, making sure that similar crimes or similar sentences are handed down. But there's a broader conversation here about mandatory minimum sentences in Colorado, and one defense attorney recently told me, this is one case. There are a lot of people who are sitting in prison for the rest of their life because of these mandatory minimums. I wonder if you support reforming those broad mandatory minimum laws, or if you have plans to, offer clemency to other people who were sentenced under these laws.
Well, this was a particularly absurd sentence, and it's impossible for anybody to face victims of other deliberate violent crimes, whether it's murder or else, and say, why did your perpetrator get a lower period of time than 110 years, which somebody got for a crime, negligent driving. He made a mistake. He needs to serve his time. We research similar crimes. People serve about 10 years for that. Some people don't serve any time for that, and they should. But 110 years was absolutely ridiculous, which is why it engendered the outrage that it did. And we want to make sure we have consistency across our justice system. Our lens is simple, Jesse. Show us with the data on how a particular change reduces crime and makes Colorado safer and helps us achieve our goal of making Colorado one of the 10 safest states. And of course, I'll put my name to it.
On the affordable housing front, obviously there's a lot of folks now in Louisville and Superior who are going to be facing this. It's something that we're all going to be focusing on, and the mountain towns certainly have this crisis. One thing that always kind of confuses me is just a Coloradan is how government can solve the affordable housing crisis in the state, because at some point we've got more people moving in and not enough housing. Are there efforts, are there ways that we can support, building out new housing and maybe match that growth with our water constraints, with our wildfire constraints? Where's the balance there, and where can the legislature and your administration step in?
So yes, and yes. Now, government as a whole absolutely impacts it. I think the frustrating part for many state legislators, for myself, is that, of course, the zoning authority is entirely local. So if you have a town, there was one, a Denver suburb, Lakewood, that the voters passed a essentially no growth initiative, no very few new developments. That increases prices. That is contrary to our statewide goal of making housing more affordable. So we can lead. We can lead with the carrot. We can lead with the stick. We can try to encourage the type of housing developments that are affordable, that have a lower energy profile, electric, that are located along transit corridors and make it easier to get people to work or close to where jobs are. So all of those things are part of the statewide plan. The challenging piece is that the state has to work with so many jurisdictions around the actual zoning and placement of housing. But with the tools in our toolbox, we can absolutely have a positive impact. And that's why we're so interested in working with the Democrats and Republicans in the legislature to maximize the impact of this $500 million investment. And to be clear, no one has ever said we're just going to put $500 million in and build housing. We hope to unlock billions of dollars of housing with this $500 million catalyst. And that's really the goal here.
Got it. And so I mentioned earlier that, we like to track all of your promises here at the Colorado Sun. So during your first campaign, we pulled out 10 or 15 or so that were big ones. And I want to give you credit for some of the ones that you were able to accomplish. Of course, universal pre-K, kindergarten, and income tax reduction, oil and gas, local control. But there were a few on that list heading into 2022 that weren't checked off. And hopefully you can address a few of these quickly. Tabor reforms was something you talked about during your first campaign. What would they be, and are those still on the table? Is that something you're interested in?
Yeah, look, of course. And in fact, I supported referendum C, which did not pass. You could argue, and I would think it's the case, that the additional revenue that comes in for preschool was done under Tabor, but that's new Tabor exempt revenue. There was also a historic mill levy reform bill that I signed that helps address some of the consequences, and of course Gallagher amendment repeal. So I think it would be fair to say that's a partially accomplished one there, Jesse. There's been it's not like there's been no progress in that area. I'm pretty excited about some of the progress we've made in fiscal areas, and particularly the voter approval of the repeal of the Gallagher amendment.
I think partial credit is a fair interpretation, and maybe this one's a partial credit, but I kind of wonder too if you have bigger plans on this. But you also had talked about passing an initiative to better fund education. Obviously, voters approved Proposition EE, but that doesn't affect K-12 education in Colorado. What's going on there, and any discussions for 2022 or beyond?
You're right. So that's also partial. Also, our legislative initiative to fund full day kindergarten also resulted in additional funding for most districts on the other grades, because many of them were subsidizing kindergarten. The voters also approved increased gambling limits with funding that will soon go to community colleges in that area. And this year in particular, I mentioned how excited I was that not only are we proposing a record 8% increase in funding for our schools, $13,000 for a class of 25 kids, but also a route to sustain that over the next several years, equally as important. School districts like cities, like counties, they also have a lot of one-time money, but that often can't become part of what they build into their teacher compensation program in the long run or reduce class size. They can use it for one-time bonuses and hopefully transformational investments in curriculum or in light capital. But yes, we're excited about the progress we've made, but we want to make sure that we have some of the best schools in the nation. And of course, funding is part of that picture.
So I want to get to some 2022 election questions, just kind of broadly speaking, but quickly, COVID is not where anybody wanted it to be right now. Obviously, we're kind of on the back end of this fire that just came through. And I know you and I have talked about kind of this role as consoler in chief that you sometimes have to play in governor. I wonder if you can just talk about, that position that you're in and how you've kind of essentially the entire time you've been in office now, between the STEM school shooting and fires, other mass shootings. Now we're here. Just kind of how you've handled that and your view of Colorado's resiliency.
Sadly, Jesse, there's been more of that than I would have cared to have. We had the 3 largest wildfires in the history of our state. We, of course, just had the Boulder County fire, consoling some people that I've known for years, others that I just met that lost everything they had. We've lost over 9,000 people to COVID. I've lost 2 friends to COVID. I've had others that have, recovered. And of course, as I said, there's been a lot of hard days as governor, but just on a personal level, certainly one of the harder days was going to the hospital after the STEM school shooting and visiting the kids that had been shot, the ones that had been shot and were hospitalized survived. We still lost Kendrick Castillo, a real hero who saved the lives of others. But, those kinds of things aren't a reason that somebody runs for governor. I mean, maybe somebody, that's all they want to do. I've never met that person, but it's something that comes with the job, right? And so it's tough. It's emotionally difficult in a way that policy isn't, right? Like we can debate whether to increase school funding 7.5% or 8.5%, or exactly what to do on an environmental bill. And that can be, those can be difficult discussions, but just not emotional at the same level as, embracing and hugging a family that just found out that they lost everything they had, and their beloved family dog who was trapped inside. So it's just, there's tough times, and it's really the job of a governor to do what they can to be that rock and that consoler in chief, and to have empathy for those who are impacted. Now, the flip side, Jesse, is just the great spirit I've seen uniting Coloradans, whether it was people knitting masks for our first responders in the early days of the pandemic, so many people helping with the fires, the outpouring of love and support for people impacted from the school shootings. So just to see that warms my heart, and to see so many Colorados stepping up and helping those in need.
So talking about the election this November, 2022, I really see it as a test of just how blue Colorado really is. And, I wonder how you're feeling heading into this election. Obviously, you won by a pretty large margin, but there's so much talk about nationally Democrats being in trouble. One thing that I thought was kind of maybe telling was Democratic consultant Mike Dino said that he thought that you'd still win, but that it would be harder than you wanted it to be. Are you feeling confident about your party's chances in November?
Well, I'm not a pundit. I'm just living the experience. I think all we can do is just work hard to respond to people's needs. If Democrats and Republicans can work together to save people money, to make Colorado more affordable, they'll both be rewarded. If we can make an impact on housing costs, on saving people money on healthcare, on making Colorado a safer place by more effectively fighting crime, I think people will have more confidence in our ability to get things done. And that goes for office holders in both parties. I think at the end of the day, there are people, of course, who are just voting Democrat or just voting Republican. But what I think most Coloradans want to see is, are you making progress on the issues that matter to me? And that's really the priority for us.
So in 2018, you spent $23 million of your own money to win, and you faced some criticism from Democrats and also from Republicans. I wonder if you're planning to inject that same amount or even more this time around.
Well, look, there's no great way to fund campaigns if you're realistic in today's day and age. And I've long supported reforms around public financing and other reforms that would level the playing field. But look, I don't think it's great when politicians take millions of dollars of special interest money. We've always had because I'm able to fund my own campaign, because I've been successful creating businesses and jobs, we've had a limit of $100 per year on contributions to my campaign. So there's nobody who has to come to me for a favor and say, I gave you, $10,000 to your campaign, you owe me this. And I think that's part of what turns people off about politics. So while of course we're going to raise the money needed, we have a broad grassroots fundraising base. We also support other efforts. We're going to do what we need to get the message out. But at the end of the day, it's real results for real people that wins elections. It's not money spent by either side. Of course, that's part of it to get the message out, but you can't put lipstick on a pig. I think was that a Sarah Palin quote? Who thought you'd hear me quoting Sarah Palin? But at the end of the day, it's really about results for real people.
Okay, and last election question quickly, because I want to get one or two reader questions in before we got to let you go. People have been talking about 2024 and presidential ambitions for you. I think Fox News mentioned something along those lines, and I think you gave an interview recently to a magazine when you said you weren't interested. Any plans to run for president if President Biden doesn't seek re-election in two more years?
No way, no how. No, you're not going to get me to leave Colorado. I've done my time in Washington. I am so excited to be back, and I'll either be a former governor in a year or in 5 years, and either way, I'll be very excited to take on the next chapter of my life here in Colorado.
Okay, great. And I just want to sneak one reader question in and also tackle a subject that I know it's on a lot of people's minds right now, climate change. One reader wanted to know, and I know I'm hoping you can kind of talk about this in your budget, but when will the state incentivize the electrification of school buses, and if there's any other climate change efforts you want to throw in here?
Yeah, that's actually a particularly exciting one. We do look forward to working with the legislature around supporting electrification of school buses. There's a modest investment from the federal infrastructure package on that, but if we couple that with a strong state investment, we could really accelerate electrification of school buses. Also of significant note, some of the larger diesel trucks we can accelerate to new and cleaner technology. Air quality can and should be a focus of making Colorado safer, right? When we talk about safety, it's about safety from crime and public safety, but it's also about having clean air to breathe and staying healthy. And of course, we look forward to doing what we can to improve air quality, some of that with the historic opportunity to make investments this legislative session.
Great. Well, thank you, Governor. I know I went over by a minute or two. I really appreciate your time during what I know is a very busy week, and thanks as always for joining the Colorado Sun. I know our readers and viewers certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, so we are going to transition now into the legislator part of our night. So we've got two Republicans who are going to join us now, and then we're going to switch after about a half hour to two Democrats who are going to join us to end. And just so you stick around because you want to hear what they have to say, Senate Majority Leader Steve Fenberg and House Majority Leader Daneya Esgar are going to join us here after our Republican section of the night. So joining us now is State Senator Bob Rankin, a Carbondale Republican who sits on the Joint Budget Committee. And then we've got another Western Slope Republican, State Representative Janice Rich of Grand Junction, who are joining us. And we're really excited to have them on here. I know... There you are. There you are, Senator. I know Senator Rankin struggled to come back here. He was dealing with all the flight issues that a lot of Americans are dealing with these days. So thank you for making time. So I'll kind of hand the floor to you guys. You guys just heard, the governor kind of talk about his priorities for this legislative session, answering some questions on topics of the day. Why don't I hand it over to you, Representative Rich, to kind of talk about, things you're going to be doing this session and to respond to the governor if you wish to on some of what he talked about.
Well, thank you, Jesse, and thank you to the Colorado Sun for hosting this tonight. I found it interesting that the priorities are very similar to the Republicans that we actually offered in a press conference in June of this year. And his priorities seem to be very familiar or similar to ours. So because, one of our top goals is to make Colorado more affordable, because we do live in a state where middle class families cannot afford their homes, gas, or groceries. And we as Republicans want to reserve the reverse the excessive fees, taxes, and regulations that threaten to put the American dream out of reach. That's really a big thing for Western Colorado, which is a part of the state that I represent. We do want to prioritize public safety. In the last 3 years that I've been a legislator, the majority party has advocated for crime and criminals, and we want to provide better training for our officers and work to recruit and retrain more officers, bring down the crime rate, which under the Democrats' watch is spiraling out of control. We also want to expand educational choice. We would like to foster greater choice for all families and find innovative ways to ensure funding follows the student rather than being bound to systems. We believe that the one-size-fits-all system has failed our most vulnerable students. And don't get me wrong, I come from a family of school teachers, but we have right now our students in grades 3 to 7 are not meeting the grade level expectations in both English and math and reading. And so we need to try something else, because what they've been trying, at least in the 3 years I've been in the legislature, has not worked. We also are, as specifically for me, because I'm on the Western Slope, we do want to stop the war on rural economies. It was never more apparent than this last year with some of the agriculture bills that the attack is on for agriculture in rural Colorado. It doesn't matter if it's the Western Slope or the Eastern Plains, but that became very apparent. We want to continue to protect water and forests, prioritizing the Western Slope water and forest. And we do want to support private sector innovation to create environmentally friendly and affordable energy. I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know that you've given us 30 minutes and I want to give Senator Rankin some time, and then we're happy to answer questions if that's what I think that's what your agenda had.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Senator Rankin, I'm hoping you can kind of chime in too. I know Representative Rich covered a lot, but your reaction to what the governor said and what your priorities are this session.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse, and congratulations to you and the Colorado Sun. I look forward to your work this year. Your growth is really inspiring, and there's a lot to like in the governor's talk and in the budget proposals, which we on the Joint Budget Committee have now had a couple of months to really dig into, and so I think we'll find a lot of room for nonpartisan work and cooperation. We're really, our caucus is really looking forward to that, because I think we can make a lot of progress in the areas of affordability and some of the other things the governor talked about. But having said that, we will not neglect our responsibility as the minority party to have alternate proposals and to be very critical of some of the aspects of the proposals that we're seeing. That's our job, and at least we feel that it is, to cooperate in those areas that we agree on, but to point out other alternatives and other proposals. We'll be doing that through a series of bills that our members will offer. Just to run through some of the things that are of concern, we've got a lot of opportunity this year to do things in behavioral health, early childhood, but those things come with new bureaucracy. And we're also seeing proposals across the board in almost every department to add a few people here and there that I would consider from my corporate days to be overhead. So I think we're going to be looking really hard at new FTE, whether it's one new body or 20 across the board, and talking about the size of government. And that's incredibly important, because as we spend all this money, and this will be a year of how we spend money. That'll be the primary focus on most of our bills, and it's important to make really good judgments that impact not just this year, but 5, perhaps 10 years out in the budget. So we're going to be, my side is going to be very focused on the long-term thinking about Colorado's economic health. And that comes with thinking about adding government, which we cannot support, we cannot sustain for the long term after the federal funding goes away. I'm very concerned about that. On the education side, we think maybe this is the year to do away with the budget stabilization factor, the negative factor. We think that there's an opportunity to do that, to finally get rid of that issue that's been hanging around for so long. And along with that, I think it's time to eliminate the inequities caused by the mill levy overrides that cause some of our poorer districts in terms of asset value, property asset values, to offer less opportunity. Another aspect we will be promoting, we'll be asking for more devoted to the unemployment insurance trust fund. The governor has proposed $600 million. The debt's a little over $1 billion now. And the 600 will still cause an increase in the premiums, and we'll be pushing for that relief directly to business going forward. I will always support, and my caucus will support, rural issues. Severance taxes are drying up. We have to decide whether we're going to continue to support those important grant programs and how that works long term. So I want us and my caucus wants to take a hard look at where we go with severance taxes. Healthcare access in rural areas will continue to be a serious problem. And as much as we've done for healthcare, we still have healthcare access issues in rural areas. Issues like remote patient monitoring and clinics and that sort of thing, we have to pay a lot of attention to. On the public safety side, couldn't agree more with those comments, but I would add that we need to do more. And I consider fire a public safety. Our sympathies are with the folks in Boulder County, but we learned about that. In 20, we had a terrible season out west. We need to do a lot more in forest health and mitigation efforts and detection efforts, but we need to help our local fire departments. The one thing we have not done is provide safety equipment and benefits to volunteer firefighters. So we'll be pushing that hard. On the climate change side, we'll continue to ask the questions. For all the things we're doing of transition, how much does it cost? How much are we affecting the jobs and the employment, the health of our citizens in those areas that are having to transition? And how much does it matter? What's the cost benefit of Colorado being way out there in front leading? I think we all admire those efforts. We know long term they're good, but what's the real cost benefit of some of these actions that we're taking? And what's the difference between the cost benefit on the Front Range versus rural Colorado, which I certainly represent, and many of us do. So those are just some of my reactions to what I've heard the governor say, but I'll come back to the point that there's a lot to like. There's a lot of bipartisanship. There's a lot of progress that we can make together this year.
Well, thank you. Those are some really good thoughts. I might throw out my notes here and kind of ask a first question, since you discussed the climate change issue, right? I think sometimes people, there are certainly Republicans that are in your caucus, and certainly in your caucus, Representative Rich, who don't believe that climate change is real. It sounds like you agree that it's real, but the question is how to resolve it. I think what you said about the impact of trying to address climate change being spread evenly across the state. How would you see that happening, right? I mean, a lot of the coal mines are in Western Colorado, coal power plants. How could we shift the burden of the renewable energy transition to more places in Colorado?
Well, I think a lot of those decisions have already been made, Jesse, so I'm not going to try to retrace the past, but I think the pace of transition, we've decided as a state, through probably a majority of the voters, to have a very rapid pace of transition. How much is that worth on the world stage? And we will continue to ask that question. But we're also going to be proposing that we look at other forms. We're going to ask we're going to ask for a new look at small nuclear, for example. We don't believe, my caucus doesn't believe, that we've taken advantage of small hydroelectric facilities throughout the state. Perhaps we're a little bit too focused on wind and solar, and there are other forms of alternative energy, and there are other ways to use coal that can, lighten the transition. So I think we've been so focused on that transition to wind and solar that we've neglected other forms of energy. We've neglected a slower transition when it might actually support jobs and people. So we're going to be asking to back up and take a hard look at our whole policy on transition to renewable energy, and that does not mean that we deny climate change, nor do we deny the need to move to renewable energy.
You want to chime in here?
I believe that Senator Rankin spelled that out. I don't know that I could add a whole lot to that. Thank you, though.
Yeah. So on the budget stabilization factor, on the negative factor, right? So in case folks aren't familiar with that, it's basically the IOU that the state legislature wrote to schools in the wake of the Great Recession in order to kind of keep the budget balanced. That's hundreds of millions of dollars, I believe we're talking now. And obviously, Senator Rankin, you're the budget expert on this, but how would you propose, eliminating the budget stabilization factor? And, what would you not be spending that money on if you decide to go ahead and eliminate it?
Well, first of all, our Joint Budget Committee staff, who's a lot smarter than me, has given us a plan. So, I'm not just proposing something. I'm actually basing those comments on a specific plan that's outlined by the Joint Budget Committee staff. And it looks it looks forward. The factors,
From Colorado something?
hello, the factors that play into that really are not just the general fund, but it's the property tax contribution, the local property tax contribution. So what we've done is look several years out. So what's happened is the average across the state, and it's certainly not consistent, but the average increase in local property taxes, if you go 2 years out, supports a larger percentage of the budget than it has in the past. Secondly, enrollment is dropping, and so we're forecasting that. So when you put enrollment together with local contribution and you make some sacrifices on the general fund, then it looks like there's a possibility of putting those factors together and eliminating the negative factors. So I want to see us propose that.
Do you know what specifically, what the hit to the general fund would be under that proposal? I'm just not familiar with it.
Well, what we have to look at is, we're okay for next year, but the year after that has to do with a projection of those local property taxes. And I've asked I don't have that projection yet, but my estimate is that we will be able to sustain it for without a major change in the, in the general fund budget for 3 or 4 years out. So we're still developing the economics, but I believe it's doable.
And thank you for doing the number stuff for me. I would be surprised that I could never have those numbers off the top of my head. Of course, the stuff that you guys do at the JBC always kind of makes my head spin. So along the lines of the funding debate and affordability in Colorado, the governor talked a lot about trying to put off some of these fee increases, whether or not it's the transportation fee increase for next year. That would be a substantial amount of money that the legislature would be spending. I think it's $60 million for the transportation fee. Do you feel like that's going to solve the cost problems in Colorado? Is that the right spending of that money? And maybe Representative Rich, do you want to take this one?
Thank you, Jesse. It might be. I thought it was interesting. There's more to that than just the road fee. I think that in that bill that was passed by the majority last year had about 8 different fees. And he talks about the road fee, but he didn't talk about the others. So I'm not sure if he's planning to delay all of those until after the November election or not.
Senator Rankin?
Yeah, the thing about those fees, Jesse, is that's money that won't come in. So since we're in Tabor refund territory, that amounts to less refund. So in essence, it doesn't directly affect the general fund spending.
Right. Okay. I guess the question is, do you see this as maybe a political move more than one that actually affects people's bottom lines? Because of course, the fees will still exist, and in the future, people will have to pay them, just maybe not, in the next year.
No, I think we should, we may be in Tabor refund territory for years to come. Mm-hmm. And so that it may be possible to keep those fees reduced for a long time.
Representative Rich, you passed a bill last year to kind of track some of the affordable housing spending here in Colorado and just keep tabs on that money. Obviously affordable housing is something that we're talking about as a state right now. Talk to me about why you think it's important to track that money, and then also, what plans you have to work in that space in the upcoming session.
Well, affordable housing, you can find different areas of the state government that funds affordable housing, and we wanted to bring all of that together. And I believe the Joint Budget Committee actually supported this bill as well, so that we could have it all in one place and see just how much money the state is spending on affordable housing, because it was spread out all over the state government. This year, I don't have a bill or anything about that. But we're hoping that if those various departments can bring all of that together. I know I would ask a lobbyist last year because it seemed like there were a lot of bills that had to do with affordable housing. And they said, so how much money has the state spent on affordable housing? And he could not answer that question. And it was a lobbyist in one of the state departments. So it's very important that we pull all of that together and find out exactly how much we're spending.
Kind of going back on the numbers front, Senator Rankin, I know Democrats have been talking a lot about this idea of a structural deficit in coming years, essentially saying that, government is growing so much and because of Tabor constraints, Colorado won't be able to pay for that. I know you told us you felt like that was an attack on Tabor. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it kind of goes to this government growth issue that you were discussing earlier.
Yeah, it sure does, Jesse. I mean, there's a structural deficit if we increase the size of government beyond what we can afford on a sustainable basis. So there are a lot of assumptions built into that chart, which has been widely promulgated. You have to take into account inflation rates because Tabor allows you to grow by the inflation rate. So which inflation rate are we assuming for Tabor? And then you have to assume that the cost of government is going to inflate faster than Tabor allows growth, inflation plus population. That may be true, but it's also fueled by what we add, and I talked earlier about looking at every FTE added to the size of government, and they are there. I mean, almost every department in their budget request is adding administrative staff for various things. Some of them may be important. For example, there are 19 people being added for diversity, equity, and inclusion across various departments. There is, Department of Treasury is adding 4 or 5 people. So you just look at every division in every department, and you'll find a growth of what I would consider to be overhead, indirect cost. So I think that those costs really do fuel the future costs of government. Now, we also are adding 2 big bureaucracies for things that we all agree are necessary, early childhood and behavioral health.
Right.
So is that the right size? I mean, can we do with less people? Can we do some of those functions with existing staff? So all of those things contribute to the so-called structural deficit. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, but particularly the opposition party, to question every one of those new FTEs that are added to the cost of government.
So on the spending front, to some of this American Rescue Plan Act money, Governor Polis and the Democrats want to use some of this money to tackle the crime issues in Colorado by being proactive, by attacking behavioral health issues, addiction issues in Colorado. I wonder if you feel like that's the best way to, and I mean both you, Representative Rich and Senator Rankin, feel like that's the best way to kind of tackle the crime issues that we're seeing in Colorado, or what the Republican alternative is, what you guys are planning to bring to the table to address the crime wave.
Jesse, I would like to just say that, the Republicans, we want to be there to support law enforcement and not advocate for crime or criminals. We want to be there for the victim and their families. And those are the type of bills that I'm going to be wanting to support.
Senator Rankin.
Yeah, I agree with that. Recruiting, training, equipping local fire departments. Local police departments. I always include fire and public safety, but yeah, I think support to our police. They're also, probably will be a series of bill coming out of the Judicial Committee, and that we'll be looking hard at sentencing issues. Those are pretty political issues, or have been across the country. So I think we'll be looking hard at all of those bills. We don't know what's coming, but I expect, and I don't know what they are yet, but I know some of our members will be introducing very specific bills to support our law enforcement folks.
So looking ahead to this November's election, I talked to Governor Polis about, the idea that Democrats are facing some speed bumps right now, that there are, there's national polling that shows they could be, maybe not doing as well among voters as they used to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that voters are going to run to Republicans, right? Representative Rich, you discussed this idea that, Republicans presented this list of the promise to Colorado, all the ways that you guys want to, show Coloradans that how you would do things differently. How do you get that message out? Republicans have lost 2 or 3 election cycles here. How are you able to get that message and show an alternative to voters and kind of reverse the trend?
Well, I can only speak for, where I'm from, but I talk about it all the time when I talk to groups over here on the Western Slope. And I do know that the Republicans, both from the Senate and the House, will be making another presentation next Wednesday after the session opens, I think around noon. And maybe that notice has already gone out to the media, but I would assume, because I have been in other areas as well, when the legislators of those particular areas, they're talking about it as well. And every time I talk to the media or I talk to any group, I talk about our commitment to Colorado and what we would like to see Colorado look like.
Senator Rankin?
I think that's right. I think we have to have better ideas in public safety and crime prevention. I think that's a hot ticket item. I think on education, we have some good ideas that have to do with choice, school choice. I think we will continue to push what's important in education. And that means the basics. That means teaching kids to read. We're making great progress in reading. There was an article by the Fordham Foundation today that puts Colorado essentially in the lead based on what we've done bipartisan reading. So we're going to have some good ideas on how to move the basics of education and education variety and choice and parental involvement forward. So I think those are going to be a little bit different than the public education union-based ideas that we've lived with. So I think we're going to have some good ideas on climate change, where we are on board that climate change is real and what do we do about it, but how do we do that reasonably and economically? So I think we're going to see, I'm hoping, and I know that it's true because I know some of what's coming, that you're going to see some really innovative ideas. On top of all that, we're going to continue, and I've talked about it, we're going to continue to be financially responsible so that we have sustainable budgets going forward over a 5 to 10 year period, that we don't build government that we can't sustain. We're going to be very much on that tack. I think those are innovative ways of looking at Colorado state government, and I think the voters will respond to our message.
All right, well, we've got time for 2 reader questions before we get to the Democrats who are waiting. And so one of our readers wants to know, actually a few of our readers asked this question, the Democrats are going to bring a piece of legislation this year to try and enshrine a woman's right to get an abortion in Colorado, given the debate over Roe v. Wade in Supreme Court. I wonder where you two stand on that, and if you think a state law is needed to make that right, put it in law here in Colorado. Senator Rankin.
Well, I don't know. I'd like to wait for the Supreme Court's ruling on that to see how much leeway the states have. I mean, it will be a controversial issue, not just, it won't be hardcore, Republicans against Democrats. It'll be an issue that's seriously debated, I believe, among all of us. So I don't want to prejudge what the Supreme Court may say, nor what members of my own caucus may feel about it until we have time to talk about that in more depth.
Representative Rich?
Thank you, Jesse. I think it's something that the majority party is just probably going to try to politicize. And I agree with Senator Rankin. It'll be a long debate, and I'm not even sure that it's necessary to have that debate, but they'll make it political, and we'll have to go through it.
All right. And last question, given that it's January 6th and a lot of the country is looking back to what happened in Washington, D.C. a year ago, you two are both lawmakers who like to work across the aisle that certainly work with Democrats in a lot of different positions. And some of our readers were really concerned just about the future of democracy. And I think, everyone agrees who's been following politics recently that there's a lot of vitriol out there. How do you feel about, our politics going forward? Do you feel good about what's going on at the Capitol, or are you worried about the future of our republic? Representative Rich?
Thank you, Jesse. I think because people listen to everything that goes on a national level, they don't realize that on a state level, we actually get more things done than they do on the national level. But they think that we are having as many difficulties as Congress is. We actually can see eye to eye on several things, and I'm very open to listening to the other side. And I think that, we can find some common ground if everybody, is willing to come to the table instead of just bulldozing something through. I don't think that's good policy. But if they're willing to talk to us, we're willing to talk to them.
Senator Rankin.
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and I am concerned. I think we all are dealing with constituents who we consider to be, I'll use the word extreme. Some of their beliefs are really heartfelt. They are not taking these issues lightly, but they feel very strongly. I think the best we can do is try to set an example, and I think Representative Rich is exactly right. We need to show them that what they see on these polarized TV channels is not what state government is all about. It's just tragic to watch network television or cable television and hear the diatribe, the polarized positions. I don't feel that way when I go to work in the state legislature, and I hope that very few people in the legislature do feel that way, do feel that polarized. So I think it's incumbent on us to try to demonstrate what good government is and what good politics is. Politics is finding the sweet spot in the middle where you can agree on behalf of the population. That doesn't mean that we should not have our differences, and it would be a mistake to give up on debate and on differences, because that's the process. It's our job to oppose and to reconcile and sometimes compromise. But I am concerned, and I'm concerned because of the influence that those national issues have on my constituents.
Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate your time tonight and your thoughtful words on all these different things, and I look forward to talking to you and bothering you all session long. Senator Rankin, I like to bother you on the floor about budget issues when I have no idea what's going on. So thank you for being a great resource for me, and thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to transition over now to the two number 2 Democrats in the Colorado legislature who have joined us tonight. So first we've got Senate Majority Leader Steve Fenberg of Boulder and House Majority Leader Daneya Esgar of Pueblo. And Majority Leader Esgar, I know this is your last year in the legislature, and so you've been there for a while. We're excited to kind of hear your expertise and viewpoint of things. So similar to what we did with the Republicans and Senator Governor Polis, sorry, demoted him. I'm hoping you guys can share a little bit about your plans for the upcoming session. If you want to respond at all to some of what the Republicans said, and Representative Esgar, I'll let you kick it off.
Great. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for hosting this for folks to really be able to engage. I think it's a great platform, especially given where we are in the world, where we can do these types of things across the state virtually. I think it's really important. So I just want to say, especially Representative Rich and Senator Rankin, I have great working relationships with them, and in fact, great friendships. And Bob Brooks actually really made me miss the JBC just listening to him talk tonight. That I missed being there and in the thick of the wonkiness of the numbers. So good to see them both. I just really think that, Governor Polis really laid it out really well, and I'm excited to get to work, roll up our sleeves and get back in that building, get to work and get things done for the people of Colorado. And that really does include saving people money. We know, we've heard it over and over again, that people just really need to figure out how they can not just get by, but do better. And that's really part of our plan. We're working to cut costs and improve affordability so that all Coloradans can keep more of their hard-earned money in their wallets. We're working to really reduce fees on starting your own business, reduce fees on driver's licenses and professional licenses for nurses, especially all of our healthcare workers on the workforce, to reduce the financial burden that they have for these essential workers. We've been depending on them to help get us through this. What can we do for them? We're going to actually really work really hard to make sure that housing is more affordable by directing nearly $400 million in federal funds into proven strategies, right? Like, we're not just making new ideas up. These are proven strategies. We're going to leverage private and local funds to rapidly finance the development of affordable housing units. We're also going to deploy several thousands of high quality affordable homes quickly, especially in more rural parts of the state. It will create jobs. We're talking prefab home companies, bringing new manufacturing jobs back into our state. We have a great prefab company here in Pueblo that is really looking into these funds and figuring out how they can expand their business to make sure that there's more affordable housing available here in Colorado. We're going to continue our efforts to actually save people money on healthcare and on prescription drugs, including making sure that drug rebates are actually being passed along to consumers. Coloradans are going to actually save money through expanded access to universal preschool, building out our recent success in expanding access to full day kindergarten statewide as well. I think something that's always been near and dear to my heart is really making sure that we're also setting students up for success here in Colorado. And we have plans to do that as well. It's not just, we want to make sure that public schools and teachers have the resources they need and not divert funding from public schools who need it to recruit and retain the teachers right now. The past 2 years, we know, have been extremely difficult for students and parents alike. We've worked to address this by funding high impact tutoring for pandemic related learning disruption. And we've actually made 3 free mental health counseling sessions available to students. We know that mental health has always been an issue when it comes to students, but the pandemic did nothing but make that worse. And we want to make sure that we are looking out for those students, and we've made that accessible and available to all students. We've also made major progress in recent years, including taking steps to create full day kindergarten, universal pre-K, and get more quality teachers into the classroom. The governor alluded to this, and even Senator Rankin alluded to this. This session, we're going to make the largest investment in K-12 education in the state's history, to actually prepare our workforce and students for success, and to ensure that every student actually has the resources in their classrooms to succeed. A child's success should not depend on where they live. It should not depend on the community's wealth that they live in. Every year, we've been increasing per pupil funding, and the governor has put forward, as you heard, a strong proposal to increase that work by up to 8% increase. And we anticipate working closely together to really accomplish that shared goal of investing in students and teachers and schools. In addition to next year's historic increase per pupil funding, we're also looking to prepay funds for future years so we can sustain this increase. I don't want to repeat what Senator Rankin said, but really making sure that there's a plan. If we're going to start tackling the BS factor in a really significant way, making sure we can sustain that and get this done and get it taken care of. We're also focused on expanding post-secondary credentials to actually keep up with our fast-changing economy, so our young people have every opportunity before them. We've got regional grants now that are out there that will actually incentivize higher education institutions and employers to actually work together to build new pathways into the fastest growing industries in our state. Pueblo's been a prime example of this. Our Pueblo Community College has worked hand in hand with several different industries right here in Pueblo to figure out how they can create this pathway to get workers into the workforce. This is going to literally incentivize more workforce happening here in Colorado. We also have new improved pathways that will help guide Coloradans from high school into the workforce or further education, earning credentials that could actually be combined later on into a degree. We've got a lot of great opportunities to really be creative and find ways to make sure that we are doing everything possible to set our students up here in Colorado for success. So those are really two big ways that I think that we can move forward. I know that the majority leader in the Senate also has some other topics that he can discuss that the Democrats are really pushing forward. I just want to reiterate to folks who are listening to this and maybe for the first time that Colorado is different than Washington. We are not Washington, D.C. We're going to have differences of opinions. It's always going to happen. But for the most part, we are all going to collaboratively come together. I don't think it's a mistake that some of the things that we're talking about are shared ideas on both sides of the aisle. It's just different approaches to it. And I look forward to this session of really sitting down, coming together and getting the work done for the people of Colorado.
Thank you. I'll hand the floor over to Senator Fenberg.
Thanks, Jesse. It's funny going last after all these folks. I feel like I'm playing cleanup, and I'm not even sure like what issues we haven't touched upon yet, but there's got to be something. I can
just start throwing questions at you if you want.
Well, let me say a couple of things, and I will honestly, actually, I'll keep it pretty brief because I think we've covered a lot, and it'd be good just to get to some questions. I think the majority leader and myself are when we're doing these conversations and talking about what's coming up this session, we are saying a lot of the same things that you heard from Governor Polis and some of the same things that you also heard from the Republicans. We really do want to focus a lot on affordability issues. It's something that we've been working on and talking about for a long time. At the heart of our healthcare reform efforts over the years is affordability. We're working on bringing down the cost of prescription drugs or providing more options for folks in the individual market or the reinsurance program that does actually bring down the cost of health insurance. We do that because of affordability. We are working on affordable housing and are slated to put about $500 million, as folks have said, into affordable housing. We're not doing that because we just really like construction and the process it takes to build apartment buildings and houses, because it's about affordability. So these aren't just election year issues. These are issues that we've been working on, I think, for a long time. In many ways, we've been working on them across the aisle with Republicans, with the governor's office, and we're absolutely going to continue to work on those issues. Another kind of a good example that has already been covered, but just to reiterate, the early childhood education work that we've been doing. Obviously, we think it's important to invest in early childhood because it is such a foundational aspect to one's success. But it's also about affordability. It's also about making sure folks can afford it and they don't have to sacrifice too many other things in their lives to be able to make it work. It's also about the workforce. If you can't afford childcare, if you can't afford preschool, it's that much more difficult for you to enter the workforce or get back into the workforce. So it's multifaceted, but affordability is something that we've been working on, I think, for a long time now, and we're going to continue that work this year. The other issues, we're absolutely, education is going to be at the forefront like it always is for Democrats. We're really focused on resources and getting more funding into schools. I think Democrats will be the first to say, yes, let's get rid of the budget stabilization factor. Getting rid of it for 1 year doesn't do a whole lot of good. We have to get rid of it in a way that is sustainable so that it goes away forever. And that's why this year's investments, as the majority leader said, we're actually prepaying. Since we have the money this year, we're going to prepay that larger investment that we're making this year for 4 or 5 years down the road to start chipping away at that negative factor. We can erase it maybe overnight this year, but it's just coming back next year if we do it that way. The only other way to backfill it is through local property taxes. And that's something that I think it's easy to talk about just wiping it clean. It's much harder when you talk about, well, that's going to probably mean more investment from your local communities through property taxes. So it's complex, but we absolutely are there as a partner if the Republicans have ideas that are sustainable to address the structural problems that we have in funding public education in Colorado. The last topic that we've talked about a lot is community safety, and I would say community health in ways as well. We've obviously talked about a lot of the issues already. I think there is a lot of agreement. I personally, I find it offensive when folks say that Democrats advocate for criminals and for crime. To me, that is an absurd statement. It is not in the spirit of collaboration and the spirit of trying to do what's best for our communities. I genuinely believe, even when we disagree, we are all trying to do the right thing. I don't think describing someone's actions as advocating for a criminal has that at heart. But we do care about criminal justice reform as Democrats. It is something that's been core to our party and to our values, and it's something we're going to continue to work on this year. And by that, I mean, crime and crime prevention and creating safer communities shouldn't just be about how do you make sure there's law enforcement to arrest people and to put them into the criminal justice system when a crime occurs. I think the more just thing we should do is think a whole lot more about root causes and prevent that crime from happening in the first place. Even when we were a tough on crime, type of approach in American politics that led us to where we are today, we still in Colorado have some of the worst recidivism rates in the country. So clearly just simply arresting people is not creating safer communities, because these people are getting out and they're repeat offenders. And that's why we're making big investments in behavioral and mental health this year, because we think behavioral health, homelessness, addiction really are some of the root causes that create cycles of violence. And that's what we're going to be especially focused on this year to stop a lot of those cycles from beginning in the first place. The other aspect of healthier and safer communities I want to touch on, because we didn't talk about it a whole lot. We did talk about wildfire response, and I agree with Senator Rankin. We need to do a lot more together. I think we actually did do quite a bit over the last couple of years with Republicans. A couple of bills that I worked on with Bob. But there's also an issue I wanted to mention is air quality. We have had an ozone problem in Colorado for a long time now, and I think people are waking up to it. I'm really excited to move the ball forward in a very significant way this year through budget investments, through policy reforms, to make sure that we are getting more people to ride transit and making it more accessible and providing more choices for folks, but also electrifying our transportation system and investing in things like the Air Pollution Control Division. Senator Rankin talked about the growth of government. We are asking a lot of our government these days. And it is not actually sufficiently staffed and resourced to do some of the things we expect from it. So when there is a disaster, like the Marshall Fire, we expect the government to respond. To be able to do that, we need to invest and have, yes, FTE and staff members sometimes doing that work to make sure that we are ready. And one example is making sure we're funding the Air Pollution Control Division appropriately so they can enforce the laws we have on the books, so that they can provide modeling and scientific expertise to ensure that we do have clean air to breathe, which in many months of the year right now in Colorado, we don't. And so we have to address that and take it seriously. So I'll leave it there, Jesse. I know you probably have several questions. I will just say, before we get into the Q&A, I agree with the comments that were made about how Colorado is different from Washington, D.C. 94% of the bills that we passed last year had bipartisan support. And there were 6% of the bills that didn't get bipartisan support, and those probably made the headlines more than the other ones. But I think it's important to know that our government in Colorado works. It is largely bipartisan. It is efficient. And I'm proud of that. And it's something we should remind voters of, with all this cynicism that there is out there, that things do work in Colorado. We do have disagreements, as folks said. And I will say, the majority party has a different role than the minority party. Just like Bob said, I agree with him. I was in the minority. I had a pretty different life back then than I do today. I stayed up thinking about how I could, do gotcha moments and have a good speech on a bill that I knew was going to die anyways. But when you're in the majority, you have the responsibility to govern and to solve problems and to address the challenges that folks are facing. And I'm not saying Republicans aren't doing that, but when you think about press conferences and announcements and catchphrases about what we're going to do this year, I think there's a difference when you know your job is to govern and to solve problems versus make political points to hopefully get the majority down the road. And I get it, both are necessary, both are part of politics. That's where we are. But I think Daneya and I are going to say that we're going to come to work every single day wanting to solve these problems that we're laying out here tonight.
Well, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember when you were in the minority and remember those days at the Capitol. And for those who are watching, right, I mean, I think it's important to know, and people don't follow their state legislatures probably as much as they should, but state lawmakers in Colorado pass hundreds of bills each year, while Congress passes maybe a handful. So a lot of things are getting done, and the bipartisanship is true. You can always go to the Colorado Sun. We've got a bill analysis every year where we look at all of the bipartisan bills and how many bills were passed without bipartisan support, and how many bipartisan bills were only passed with maybe one Republican, making them bipartisan, but by only a sliver. So there's a lot to unpack for what you guys said. I want to start with something that we ended the Republican section with, and again that a lot of readers have asked about, but. And Representative Esgar, this is probably best for you since I think you're sponsoring this bill. But the legislation in Colorado that's going to be brought this year to, ensure that women can get abortions. Talk about where that's at and why that's important. What you guys are going to do to make sure that passes.
Sure, I think it's a great question. It's clear that a patient's fundamental right to have an abortion is at risk nationwide in our country right now. And we're not going to just stand by and let Republican politicians put it at risk here in Colorado as well. We're going to codify the right to an abortion and stop any and all efforts to limit abortion access in our state. We need to make sure that we are responding to what's happening nationally and protect those in Colorado as we can. We want to make sure that we have every tool in our toolbox to make sure that we're protecting a women's health care rights, period. We already have very strong support in the legislature for this, and I want to urge Coloradans to actually email their legislators and let them know that they support this idea as well. We need the Reproductive Health Equity Act because while Colorado doesn't have many restrictions on abortion access like we've seen in other states, we don't have explicit protections either. And just seeing what's happening on the national level, we want to stand up and do what we can to protect a woman's right to access to abortion.
Switching over to the criminal justice front, Democrats in recent years have passed a lot of bills that are criminal justice reform measures, changing penalties for different crimes. It sounds to me like that's not going to be coming again this year. I think I've seen those kind of bills every year for the past 3 years that you guys have been in control. It sounds like it's more going to be shifting now to preventing crime from beginning in the first place, as opposed to changing penalties and things like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think that's mostly right, Jesse, but I think there are things that are in the works that are very intentional. For instance, the sentencing reforms actually is being brought forward by DAs and other folks outside of the legislature itself as proposals, because it is that part of our law. Those part of our laws do need to be reformed. There's a lot of things that just are a patchwork and don't line up. And so maybe some of that work will continue. We did it last year with misdemeanors, and there is probably a proposal coming on felonies. And that's really just about making sure our criminal justice code makes sense and is justifiable. I don't know. I don't think it's fair to say that there won't be any of that work done, but we have done a lot. We do want a lot of those policies to get implemented in a way before we start messing with them again. This is an area that I think clearly we heard about it tonight. We're going to continue hearing about crime and all the bills that Democrats passed in the last couple of years. Most of those bills haven't been implemented yet. And many of those bills were actually supported by Republicans. One of the big bills that folks point to is Senate Bill 217, which happened after the murder of George Floyd. That was supported by just about all the Republicans. In the Senate, it was all but one. Again, it's an example of we have different roles. Obviously, the Republicans' job right now is to poke holes and to sort of make statements like that. But a lot of these bills were actually supported by Republicans because criminal justice reform in recent years has been a bipartisan effort done at the federal level as well as the state level.
So it sounds kind of like, do you feel like Republicans are making a false connection here, right? I mean, Democrats are in charge of Colorado, but, we're having a crime wave, prices are going up. it sounds, and I think I've heard this from the governor too, that you guys feel like it's unfair for all of the problems to be pinned on Democrats and the Democratic policies of the legislature. Is that true? Why is that true, I guess?
I mean, go ahead, Daneya.
Go ahead.
It's not that it's unfair and it's like, oh, why are they picking on us? That's, we get it. We're in politics. This is what we do. But yes, I think it's largely unfounded, and it's an election year. And so that's what you're going to hear. Again, many of these bills and policies were championed, not just one Republican supporting it, but championed by Republicans. The one around sentencing reform around drug possession was absolutely championed by Republicans and passed in a bipartisan manner. And now it's being used as a talking point on Democratic policies that creates crime. So yeah, I think it's unfounded, and it's a political moment, and I get it. But at the end of the day, our job is to solve problems, and we're going to continue doing that. It's on the affordability and cost issues. Clearly, the world has been turned upside down like 12 different times in the last couple of years. Daneya and I do not control inflation. We also, heard a lot tonight about taxes going up. Taxes have gone down, whether we supported that or not. They just have, because of structural things in our tax code that require those taxes to go down. So, some of it is unfounded, some of it is misplaced blame. But we're still excited to continue having the conversations on how to solve those problems in a bipartisan way. And that's why we created these task forces that Republicans have been a part of. So when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just a Democratic agenda item. We actually created a task force to study this with experts for months. And we hope that those are going to be bipartisan bills in the end of it. I don't know why they showed up to all these meetings over the last 6 months if they weren't planning to support those bills. But our agenda really is an agenda that we try to be inclusive about and invite Republicans to share their ideas and be part of those pieces of legislation as well.
Majority Leader Esgar, kind of along this lines of, that the world is been turned upside down in recent years, and maybe this is a bit of a selfish question since I'm stuck in the Capitol with you guys for 5 months, but we're returning to the Capitol now at, what is the worst COVID surge essentially since the pandemic reached the state. Democrats are in charge. Why are we going back to the Capitol? Is it a safe environment? A lot of the efforts that have been going on during the pandemic have been, the government kind of modeling what it would like to see the public do. What's going to be done to keep, lawmakers, lobbyists, visitors, journalists safe at the Capitol this session as Omicron surges?
No, I appreciate the question. Clearly, as much as we'd like for this pandemic to be behind us, we know that simply isn't the case as we're heading into session. The vaccines have proven to be highly effective, and we're taking every step necessary to ensure the health and safety of everyone who comes into work in this building, while balancing the public's right to participate in the political process. We have to remember that's key and that's essential. While we've been seeing how rapidly things can change over the course of this pandemic, the vaccine is highly effective, and we feel that with sufficient safety protocols in place, the session can proceed safely at this time. Again, I want to say at this time, we're also being very flexible and listening to the experts, the epidemiologists. We're looking at modeling. This could change Tuesday, right? The session starts Wednesday, but as of today, we feel that we've got the right safety protocols in place and the session can proceed safely. We're going to continue monitoring the situation and always prioritize the health of not only our members, but the public and the hardworking staff who are there while ensuring that the people of Colorado can continue to participate in the legislative process. We're excited to see the session begin and do the work that we need to do to continue to move Colorado forward. We can't afford to we can't afford to not be in session. So we'll be there. There will be protocols in place, and we're going to just continue to be flexible as things literally right now in the pandemic change on a week-to-week basis. So we'll be there. We'll be safe. We'll be protecting each other.
Let's stay with you for a second, Representative Esgar,
Sure.
and then we can kind of shift this question over to Senator Fenberg, and I'm going to try and wrap things up here. But looking ahead to November, right? Pueblo, you come from a part of the state that's kind of become a political bellwether. I think, personally, I look to Pueblo and the politics that go on there as an indicator of, the democratic mood and where Colorado is shifting. I wonder how you're feeling heading into the November election with all these kind of warning signs that are going on across the country, whether it's polling or not. And then Senator Fenberg, along those lines, after Representative Esgar responds, the Senate majority after redistricting could potentially be at stake. And I wonder, if you can talk a little bit about your feeling.
When we talk about politics, I do think it's important to, really take a look at Pueblo. I just want to make sure that when we talk about what people in Pueblo really want, what they need, they want people to look out for them and help take care of them. They want to help. They want people that are going to save them money. Like that goes back to what we're trying to do. And I think that we absolutely do that. I mean, we come from what Pueblo calls themselves like Uniontown. We come from a group of hardworking folks. Both of my grandfathers were steel workers. Like, this is who we are. This is in our blood. And that's what we have to remember. We just have to remember that we are looking out for folks across all of Colorado who really truly are looking at ways to not only just get by, but to do better. And I think that that's exactly what the Democrats have planned to do. That's what we always are trying to do. But this year specifically, we want to make sure that we're saving people money. We want to make sure that we're making a safer Colorado, that we're setting students up for success, and that we're making a healthier Colorado for everyone. And I think if we stick to what we are, what's on our agenda and what we're planning on doing, people like the folks here in Pueblo are going to see that, and they're going to remember that.
Senator Fenberg.
Yeah, I think there's no question this is going to be a tough election year all over the country. I think, one of the questions you asked earlier, and I think, part of this question inherently is sort of this concept of Colorado being a blue state, and if that's going to be sustained this year. I don't think Colorado is a blue state. I think Democrats have won elections recently. And I think there are many reasons for that. I think, voters in Colorado are smart. They read their ballot, they try to really comprehend what those ballot measures are about, and they make informed decisions. And so I think this election is, yes, it's going to be challenging. I think for Democrats, I think it will be fine. But we have to prove that our policies are actually things that are going to improve people's lives. That's our job. It's not to just fight with the other side, but it's to improve people's lives. And I think our policies speak for themselves. I think the governor's leadership during this pandemic, not to mention all the other crises that we talked about, with the governor, I don't know, an hour ago. I think the handling of things that nobody ever saw coming has been on the Democrats' watch. And I think, generally speaking, even polling I've seen, even Republicans think it's been handled very responsibly. And so I think that is working for us. And I think the fact that at the end of the day, I think voters generally support our policies much more than the Republicans. And that's a debate to have. And that's a debate we will have on the Senate and House floors, as well as at the ballot boxes. We're looking forward to it. We're not going to shy away from it. And we're going to keep our eye on the prize and make sure we're doing everything we can to prove to people that we are doing policies and passing bills that improve their lives. And we would be honored to continue doing that into the future.
All right, well, let me ask one last question, just because a lot of readers did write in about this. I'm not sure if you both saw the reporting that was in the Colorado Sun and also some partner news outlets about the Colorado Behavioral Health Council, some of the money that came from HICPUF and the local mental health organization. Some of those CEOs were being paid a lot of money. I know in Summit County and Eagle County, there was a CEO who just resigned amid all of this reporting. Are there steps, are there plans to bring any legislation to kind of fix this issue, to address it, maybe rein in or provide some more accountability or oversight that you guys have on the table?
I don't, maybe the majority leader knows the specific legislation coming forward, but again, I want to point to, there's been an entire task force happening this summer that has really been digging into the issues around behavioral health here in Colorado. I don't think it's a big secret that the system is flawed. I do know that even when I was on the Joint Budget Committee, we had conversations about the difference in the pay scales of what the folks in charge were making versus the workers on the ground. We have a huge issue right now when it comes to the workforce in behavioral health, and how do we really focus on the workforce? And I think part of that has to be looking at the entire structure. So I don't know of a specific bill yet, but I do know this is something that many folks have come to me and have talked to me about and are concerned about with legitimate reasons. So we're going to dig in and we're going to take a look and see what we can find.
I think, yeah, I think the majority leader is right. This task force, I think we started out really wanting to just figure out innovative ways to invest large sums of money to provide more access. And obviously we will be doing that. I think we also found gaps and found needs, and we found reforms that need to happen. And so some of that will be coming out of this task force as well. That report will be be published in a couple of weeks. So a lot more to come on that. Although specifically on the article you're referring to, the articles, yes, I mean, I think there will be action taken. I think it's premature to talk about exactly what it is, but I do know that there are many structural reforms that need to happen. We actually spend a lot of money on behavioral health as a state. I think it's hard to say that we're being incredibly effective. We have a crisis on our hands. Our suicide rates are through the roof. Our addiction rates and overdose rates are through the roof. And we have mental health crises going on in urban areas and rural areas and suburban areas. And that's also a root cause to a lot of the violence we see. And so a lot of reforms need to happen. I do know something that's been brought to my attention by several constituents is around Medicaid reimbursement for folks who are independent therapists. We need to make sure that workforce is there and that they're supported and compensated at a rate that is fair, because we need them. Absolutely. We can't just have this workforce that's that does this work to only take folks who can pay out of pocket. We need people to be there for everyone, and that means reforming the Medicaid reimbursement process for a lot of these folks.
Well, thank you guys so much. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I appreciate you hanging with me. I know you both have young children, so late at night, and thank you guys for hanging around for the end and providing all those great updates. For everyone who joined us tonight, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of our viewers and readers here at the Colorado Sun. If you're not a member yet, now is the time to do it. coloradosun.com/join. Please sign up as a Newsletters Plus member. We'd love to have you get the unaffiliated newsletter if you want kind of